Hi and welcome to Unheard. Unheard is a platform for men to talk about emotional times in their lives in order to create a community where it's okay to share how you're feeling.
Mental illness isn't an unfamiliar phenomenon in my family, especially on my dad's side. While I was growing up, he'd sometimes tell me about how he, his mother, his brothers, and his sister suffered from depression currently, or had at some point in the past. At a young age, I didn't really understand any of the complexities of depression and the impacts it can have on those who have it. So I continued through much of my childhood quite unaware of the effects that mental illness was having on my immediate and wider family. It wasn't until I was in high school when my family and I were forced to confront some of the realities of mental illness in a whole new light. We experienced the death of my cousin to suicide. Losing a family member wasn't completely new to me, with the death of my grandfather the previous year, but the loss of my cousin was very different. This time, along with an intense sadness, there was also just a bewildering sense of confusion, which seemed also to kind of spread through the rest of my wider family. During this period, I became accustomed to trailing thoughts and emotionally charged family gatherings with no apparent way to relieve the tension. But I think that none of us were ready or even remotely equipped to discuss the heavy topic of suicide. But nonetheless, the question still loomed in everyone's minds, just why had this happened? So when we did start to briefly talk about it, the explanations offered were often quite biologically focused. I guess the implication was that mental illness runs in our family and that there's something in our genes which makes us more predisposed to this illness. And while at the time this type of account did offer some comfort over my cousin's death, I've come to understand in more recent years that this may not be a very healthy way to view mental illness. Even so, it felt a lot better that my family was at least beginning to talk about my cousin's death and some elements of mental illness. As my sister and I matured, we became more able to talk to our parents about why our cousin had taken her own life and what can make a person so unhappy. Being able to have these conversations was an important part in lifting some of the tense atmosphere which existed in my wider family surrounding mental health problems. Since finishing high school and starting a degree in health science, my views on mental illness have changed. The nature of my degree forced me to see things more holistically and to understand that it's okay to acknowledge the complexity of things in life. I now realize that mental illnesses are influenced by so many factors. A person's biology may be a contributing part of mental illness, but it's definitely not the only significant feature. By looking even just at my own life, I can see how friends, family, relationships, living environments, education, and work, and so much more all have an influence on mental health. It made me realize how fortunate I've been with support structures around me.
So were there things about your life that you think may have affected your experience in dealing with mental health issues?
Yeah, after reflecting, I can definitely see that I was lucky in so many ways in having supportive family and friends, and even the school. There were so many kind teachers who spent a lot of their time making sure I was okay and that they could offer as much support as I needed. And yeah, also I guess having an open family environment where I felt it was okay to talk about these issues, and I guess that stems from us experiencing all these things together and having to grow together to support each other. So yeah, I was definitely very lucky in that way. Also, I feel I need to acknowledge that things like my ethnicity, my socioeconomic position, the area I live in, just they all affect how easy or difficult it is to cope with issues. Just I might have less stress on me than other people in similar situations, and so I'm definitely privileged in that regard. So I've always had people in my life who support me and who I can talk to about anything, and difficult times are so much easier when you can talk to someone about what's on your mind and what's troubling you. I think that breaking down barriers to conversation around the subject is one of the most important things that we can do when approaching it. Discourse on mental health in my immediate family has become a common part of our lives. So depression can be managed a lot more easily now that we're all aware of it and willing to discuss it. As for my extended family, I think there's definitely still room to grow, but there are also a lot more opportunities to talk about mental illness now than there were a few years ago.
So what kind of things still restrict you or your family talking about mental illness?
I think in my family, one of the potential barriers to talking about mental illness is that there are actually a lot of doctors from an older generation in a time where medicine was very focused on biological elements and it didn't really acknowledge the effects of other things such as the social side of things. And so definitely when we do start discussing mental illness with say my gran and my uncles and aunts, there is definitely a tendency to start talking about biology and that being the main element of why our family might experience higher levels of mental illness. The other night I went with my family, including my uncles and aunt, to Courtney Barnett's concert, celebrating the release of her album titled Tell Me How You Really Feel. And I guess that sums it up. I'd like to think that we're all getting a bit closer every day to talking about how we really feel.